Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always I'm reading with a vengeance and I hope you are too. Today I'm here to talk to you about the books that I read in the second half of September. I am really kind of recording this off the cuff. I usually do a little bit more planning, but I've been kind of in a recording slump. I have my set routine types of videos that I'm very comfortable with, that I definitely want to keep up with. But lately I've been feeling a little creative wall. And I feel like lately my routine videos, my wrap-ups, my book hauls, my new release videos, they've kind of reached a plateau of videos that you find interesting. Lately, I've felt like if I don't keep up with the latest creative trends, then people aren't going to tune in. And I felt the pressure of having to be creative, having to do the next best thing, having to think of new things to keep people watching. The pressure's kind of built up and kind of had a negative effect on me. And I've not really wanted to record. And then, so I kind of had to take a step back and think about, well, why did I start this channel? What about doing these videos that I enjoy? And really, I kind of had to remind myself that the whole reason I started this channel, the things that I really want to talk about are actually pretty straightforward and don't really take a whole lot of creativity. I'm not here to get a whole bunch of subscribers or likes or anything like that. I'm here to talk about the books that I've read, why I like them, why I didn't like them, why you might like them. And really the only people that I'm interested in tuning in are the people who enjoy my content and enjoy me for what I have to offer, this whole bookish theme. But still, I kind of hit that wall. So even though it was time to record my September wrap up, I kind of had the feeling of, do I really want to do that? And so then I just realized I don't want to feel like that, but I didn't want to skip this video. So I am recording it. I didn't do my normal intro. I'm not sure I will be doing the intro that I had been doing. It's kind of a shtick that kind of made me me, and they're fun, but I kind of got to the point where I felt pressure to think of something creative to start my videos, and I don't want that to happen. If it comes to me naturally, then I'm going to do it. But if not, I'm just going to be kind of casual and just say hi and just talk to you about the things that I want to talk to you about, which are books. So with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and get started about the books that I read in the second half of September. There are not that many. I'm not sure what happened. If I look at the books that I have to talk to you about, nope, they're not terribly long, but for whatever reason, I only have 4 books to talk to you about for the second half of September. But I'm going to start the way I usually do and talk to you about some statistics. Yeah, like I said, not the best month. I read 11 books and I DNF'd 1 book. I already talked about that DNF in my mid-month wrap-up, which I will link down below. They were, as far as how I rated them, as far as my enjoyment of each of those books, they were mostly middle-of-the-road books. There were only 3 that I rated as really liked to love. So what is that? 25% of the books that I picked up in the month of September. Again, not the best month, but 3 books in a 1-month period time that I really like to love. If I look at it that way, then that's definitely much better perspective. Just to remind you what I read in the first half of September, I read Winter Counts, Hurricane Girl, Christmas Presents, The Skull, Ford County, Open Throat, and Triptych. Again, I will link the mid-month wrap-up down below. You can watch that if you haven't already. As I said, I had 1 DNF. That was Mona Awad's Rouge. I think I have an unpopular opinion when it comes to that book, but it is what it is. Out of the total 12 books that I picked up in the month of September, 8 were female authors, 4 male authors, 2 people of color. So enough with the statistics. Let me get started with the books that I read, starting with the books that I liked the least and leading up to the books that I liked the most. So the first book that I'm going to talk to you about is The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. I read this book for the book club that I am a part of through work. The bookstore that I work for, E. Shaver Booksellers in Savannah, Georgia, have about 7 or 8 themed book clubs. I help one of the owners run the It's a Mystery book club, and this was the book that was selected for this month. I listened to this book. This book is marketed as a mystery thriller, which is, of course, the reason why it was picked for the mystery book club. And let me just say, first and foremost, that I would not classify this as a mystery thriller. It's barely a mystery. This book follows Anne, who was born and raised in kind of a podunk town in Washington state. She ends up traveling to New York with the hopes of interning, or it's a paid internship or something like that, working for MoMA, or the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. She really has ambitions of being an academic in the world of art. And she gets there and something has happened, and the person that she's supposed to be working for last minute is called out of the country to go on some other project, and she's kind of left high and dry. But as fate would have it, someone is passing by the office as she's getting her walking papers and says, oh, wait a minute, we can use somebody like her in our project up at the Cloisters. Cloisters is kind of a branch of MoMA. They really deal with kind of Renaissance, medieval type art. It's very Gothic in its appearance and vibe. And that's where she meets Rachel, who also works right under the curator, Patrick. And you're following Anne as she is kind of fitting into this small group of people at the Cloisters as she is kind of making her way in the big city. She kind of develops a friendship with Rachel, and it's kind of a toxic friendship. And that's all I'll say about that. And then you're also kind of following this project that they're doing at the Cloisters, and it has to do with these very old tarot cards and what they mean, where they came from. So for me, something that makes a mystery thriller, typically, not always, but typically, is you're going to have a murder or a mysterious death or somebody going missing, something like that. A death does happen, but not until like the last 25% of the book. And everything leading up until that, I will say that there was a feeling of impending doom. You know something bad is going to happen to someone, but you don't know who, and you don't know why, and you don't know who the perpetrator might be. Although when the death actually happens, it was quite obvious who the perpetrator turned out to be. So there's that. Now, when I wrote my notes for this to present to you in my wrap-up video, there was going to be a lot of kind of negative things that I had to say about this because of that. Jake, thank you very much, but that's enough. However, once I had the discussion with the book club, some people brought up some very good points in that the mystery wasn't about the death and what happened to that person and why that happened to that person. Some people said that the mystery was about these tarot cards that they were studying. And so I would say, if you have more than a passing interest in art and art history, then you might enjoy this book. If you have more than a passing appreciation or interest in oracles and tarot and that kind of thing, you might enjoy this book. But if you're really interested in a mystery thriller in the traditional sense of a mystery thriller, this might not be for you. I thought there was going to be more about the tarot and how it might be applied to a murder or the mystery. It just didn't go that route, and so I was a little disappointed. All of the characters were morally gray, and I like a good morally gray character, but you better be interesting. And I didn't find any of the characters very interesting. And so if you're just going to have an unlikable character just for the sake of being unlikable, that's not going to hold my interest. So this wasn't a favorite of mine this month. I think the best part about reading this book was just the discussion in the book club. So there is that. Sometimes a book that you don't even really enjoy, if you talk about it with somebody else who didn't enjoy it as much as you didn't or enjoyed it more than you did, can create a really good discussion. And that is really the beauty of book clubs. So would I recommend this book as a mystery thriller? Not really. If you are from New York or you've been to the Cloisters, that might be something that you would enjoy in this book because it was very, very descriptive. So other than that, it wasn't my favorite of this month. And if I looked at all the books that I read in the month of September, yeah, my least favorite of the whole month. The next book I want to talk to you about is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. Yes, I finally read this book. It was on hold for over a year and 1 month to be exact, on my Libby app. Unfortunately, I'm here to give you an unpopular opinion. And it might have something to do with the fact that this book was so hyped that it created unrealistic expectations for me, and it just ended up being okay for me. I listened to this book. I've talked about this before in the past. You know, listening to a book, is it still reading a book? Yes, I absolutely believe that listening to a book is still reading a book because you're taking it in. However, I think your reading experience can be very different when you're listening versus reading the physical book. I'm not going to get too far into that, but I think that might have had something to do with my enjoyment or lack of enjoyment. I didn't hate this book. I didn't even dislike it. It just wasn't the great book that everybody has been saying that it is. It just was a little lackluster for me. I do know that there was a lot of talk that Elizabeth, the main character in this story, is very unlikable. I didn't find her unlikable. And as a matter of fact, I found her love interest, Calvin, to be more unlikable than Elizabeth. But then if you read the book, then you know what happens to Calvin. Not going to spoil it here. And so that kind of made me feel like poo. But my point is that the likability or the unlikability of each of the characters is not what did me in for this book. I think it was just overhyped, and I was left wanting. If you've been living on another planet for the past year and you don't know what this book is about, you're basically following Elizabeth, who is a scientist, a chemist to be exact, in the 1950s, where it's absolutely unheard of for women to be in highly academic careers, among other things. So there's a very big feminist theme to this story, which I absolutely love. I guess here's one of the things that I just found to be a little lacking in this particular story. Yes, in the 50s, women were treated like crap. A lot has changed since then. There are still some issues that we have in our present day. We all know, I'm not going to get into that. But yes, in the 50s, women were treated as less than. And I get it. And we know this. And it was like every other page, something shitty was happening to Elizabeth or some other woman. And not only by men, but by other women. And it was just a constant thing. And I got to be tiresome. I was like, yes, I know this. We all know this. I don't feel like anything new or fresh was brought to this theme. I guess the one thing that I did like about how the author handled the themes and that I can really appreciate is that she kind of showed that not every man was a sexist pig. And I think that's important, like with any themes when you're dealing with sexism or racism or any of the isms, is that you can't generalize an entire group of people. You have to really focus on the issue and not the behavior of people within the issue. So that I appreciated. I think she did a decent job of that. Another thing that kind of, I don't know, didn't work for me, and it's kind of unusual, is the use of the dog, 630, which I think is an absolutely fabulous name for a dog. I enjoyed the dog as a character, as kind of a sidekick, as kind of a comfort for Elizabeth, and his smarts and his background, where he came from, how he came into Elizabeth and Calvin's life. Super cute. His perspective, though, I just didn't think had a place in the story. And that leads me to the overall feeling that I had about this book that led me to not like it as much as everybody else did. This book tried to do too much. It dealt with feminism, it dealt with grief, it dealt with women friendships, it dealt with being a single parent, it dealt with all kinds of things. It went in so many different directions, and I think if there was more focus, it could have been so much more than it was for me. I enjoyed this book enough. I didn't have any feelings of wanting to DNF it or anything like that. It was a decent story. There were some really cute parts. There were some really deep parts, heartfelt parts, important messages, but I believe I fell victim to the hype. Will I watch the TV show? Probably, just because I like to compare, and since it's so fresh in my mind and it's still on Hulu, I'll probably give it a shot. Is there anybody else out there that kind of had the same experience I did with Lessons in Chemistry? So many people come into the store. The book is on display since it's still on the independent booksellers bestseller list. And every time somebody comes in and sees it, oh, I love this book, you should read this book, have you read this book? Anyway, I finally read the book, and it was okay. The next book I read in the second half of September was The Last Love Note by Emma Gray. So this was recommended to me by my manager at work, Jenny. And when she first handed it to me, I saw that it was called The Last Love Note. And I'm like, a romance. I'm like, Jenny, do you even know me? And Jenny's like, I think you would really like it. But then she totally hooked me by saying, not only does it take place in Australia, but the author is Australian, and I was totally here for it. This is one of those cool experiences I've mentioned before. I absolutely love working in an environment of people, bookish people, who read things. We all read such different things. And to have somebody say, you know what, I read this book and I think you might like it. I just love having those relationships with people. So anyways, Jenny, thank you for this. I really, really enjoyed this book. And I would say that I would not classify this as a romance so much as I would call it a love story. I think there is a distinct difference between those two things. Even if you look on Goodreads, the very first genre that's listed is romance, and down the line it also says contemporary romance. Don't let that turn you away if you're not into romance. If you like a good love story that isn't sappy, yes, I would recommend this. This has more to do with a woman who is dealing with a loss. She is grieving the death of her husband. When this book opens up, you're 2 years down the line. You're following Kate. Her husband Cameron died, and he died at a relatively young age from a disease that I'm not going to give details about, because I think that's really part of the story that I just don't want to give away. But it's a disease that does not normally happen at younger ages. So anyways, Kate is left to be a single parent to I believe, I always have a hard time remembering certain ages of characters, especially when there's a multiple timeline. This goes back and forth in time. And I'm not saying that confused me as I'm reading the story, but I forget how old their son is when Cameron dies, or in the present day when we're talking with Kate. But anyways, he's young. He's younger than 10. Anyways, Kate is struggling to get through life. She is a single parent. She works as a fundraiser for a university. She's very close to her boss. What is his name? Hugh. And she's really trying to make it through life and figure out what she wants her life to look like now that the love of her life, Cameron, is no longer a part of it. I found that the author really did a fantastic job in dealing with grief and the vast circle of grief. Because when you think about losing somebody, if you're the person that lost your husband or your parent, you're dealing with your own grief, but that grief ripples out to the other people in your life. And she really deals with that in a spectacular way. And for good reason too, because the author, Emma Gray, wrote this book in the wake of losing her own husband. So she knows what she's talking about. And so anyway, she did a really, really good job of exploring grief and the many, many areas in our lives that it touches when something like this happens. She also does it with humor. There's lots of humor in here, so there is some lightness to the story, to a very, very heavy story. One of the things that I also really appreciated about this book is Kate is an aspiring writer. So there are a ton of bookish references, literary references that were just super, super fun to read. So this was a nice surprise for me. Again, while it is marketed as a romance, it's more of a love story, and not necessarily the love story that you would think. I really, really enjoyed this. Again, thank you so much, Jenny, for recommending it to me. This is an ARC, if I didn't mention that before. This one comes out November 7th. So if you are into a good story of which that I just described, you can pick this up in November. And finally, my favorite book for the second half of the month is Pet by Kathryn Chidgey. This book took me by such surprise. I was so intrigued by the cover, and I'm going to put both covers up here because I find them both super compelling. But it wasn't the book that originally got my attention. It was the author, Kathryn Chidgey, that got my attention. And it wasn't this book that put Kathryn Chidgey on my radar. I only heard of Kathryn Chidgey when she was longlisted last year for the Women's Prize for Fiction. As you know, that is a prize that I follow quite closely, that I very much enjoy. Some of you watch me on the regular public. Oh, please stop talking about the Women's Prize for Fiction. Anyways, she was longlisted with her Remote Sympathy last year. I never got to it. I will definitely be reading it. It's been on my TBR, but now that I've read Pet, I know that I really enjoy her writing style. This book was a slow burn. It is, I would say, can it be classified as a mystery thriller? I would say as the story progresses, it gets more thrillery. As you're reading it, there's this uncomfortable feeling of impending doom. I feel like I've said that already in this video, but anyways, you definitely feel like something bad is going to happen to somebody, but you don't know who it's going to happen to. That's a delicious part of the story. What is it about? You're following Justine, and it's the 1980s, and Justine is a 12-year-old, and she's going to a Catholic school. Now, because it's in the 80s, and because she's at a Catholic school, Justine and all of her peers feel younger than 12. And I think that was by design, because this whole story is taking place from Justine's perspective, and you needed somebody who had an innocence about her, but also an intellectualism about her in order to have a certain understanding about what's going on around her. So I thought that was kind of brilliant to have the perspective of a 12-year-old, but her to come off as a little bit more innocent and immature than, say, your average 12-year-old. Justine and the rest of her peers in her 12-year-old class absolutely adore their teacher, Mrs. Price. And Mrs. Price is young, she is glamorous, and everybody wants to be Mrs. Price's pet. At first, Mrs. Price comes off as this lovely teacher, and she wants to really connect with all the students. She's giving everybody kind of a chance to be her pet students by alternating who does various little favors or chores for her. She has certain people stay after class to clean her chalkboard, stuff like that. Justine especially wants to be Mrs. Price's pet because she is dealing with the death of her own mother, I believe a year before the story opens. And so you are dealing with Justine's grief as well. As the story progresses, you realize that Mrs. Price has the uncanny ability to manipulate her students into kind of turning on each other in a way that benefits Mrs. Price. The way this story plays out is so much fun. There is like a very much of a Shirley Jackson vibe to the story. An added bonus to the story that I thought, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but Kathryn Chidgey is a New Zealand writer. This story takes place in New Zealand, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the story. I don't think I've read another book that takes place in New Zealand. But anyways, as this story progresses, you could feel this doom kind of dropping in on the students of Mrs. Price's class. And at the beginning of the story, and I don't know how she does it, but at the beginning of the story, you see Mrs. Price as the students see Mrs. Price. She's beautiful, she's young, she's perfect in the way she's got her hair and what she wears and her makeup. But then as the story progresses and as she kind of manipulates the students, it almost feels like every time she comes into a room, her hair's a little off, or her makeup is a little cracked, or something is a little off, and her whole facade is starting to kind of crack as the story progresses, and it's just brilliant. I loved this book so much. I highly recommend it. I thought the twist was brilliant and unique. This is the type of thriller that I think is few and far between, where you don't really see that twist coming, and when it happens, you're like, oh my gosh, why did I not see that? Just fantastically written. I loved her writing style. I can't wait to read her other stuff. As I film this, it's October. It's perfect time to read something kind of creepy. So if you're looking for something good, but not just gratuitous creepiness, this is a good one to pick up. So that's it. Those are the books that I read in the month of September. I'd really love to know what your favorite book was that you read in September. Or if you've read any of these books that I've talked about, I'd love to know what you thought about them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.